Hi, everybody. Great to see so many of you here. I'm so thrilled to introduce Professor Janet Vertesi. She needs no introduction here, of course. She has been part of the CITP community for as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
And she is well known for her work in many different areas, one of which is her field work studying the teams at NASA that build and operate the Mars rover. And on the other hand, topics more similar to many of you might be studying human-computer interaction, privacy, fairness, etc. And what unites all of these is a nuanced approach to studying these social technical systems through the lens of science, technology, and society. And she is probably the go-to person at Princeton for, for all of our STS questions. And we've benefited from her insight so much over the years. She has some very early well-known work on fairness, which you can see if you go to her Google Scholar, right under her name on Google Scholar, which is Janet Vertesi does not use Google Scholar, hashtag opt-out. So what is that about? So she is also very well known for her efforts in her own personal life to attempt to evade the surveillance infrastructure that pervades our digital devices, and writing about that and being very public about that, including trying to hide her pregnancy from Google. And I've really appreciated her ability to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. We've had many conversations where she has shared so many technical tips with me about setting up her own Linux box and taking charge of her own digital life, etc. And I'm usually the one taking notes during those conversations. And finally, let me also say that it's always struck me how powerful and impressive a speaker she is. Every time I listen to her speak, it really sticks in memory. I still remember, this was many years ago, you gave a talk to a large group of faculty about diversity. This was before BLM, and attitudes on campus were much more skeptical, and I was struck by how well you not only synthesized the empirical literature from like half a dozen different disciplines, but also delivered this powerful moral argument. And throughout that hour, you could see the wheels turn in the audience's minds, and the questions gradually turn from but to, okay, so how do we? And welcome.
Thank you, Arlen. My goodness. And again, it's a real pleasure to be here. I've been hanging out at CITP, again, probably as long as I can remember at Princeton as well, about 15 years or so. It's been amazing to see this community grow and change and have it, flourish under Arvin's leadership as well. So it's really great to be here. I'm going to be speaking today about some work in progress that is, along with colleagues Dana Boyd, who's now at Cornell University, Alex Taylor, who's now at the University of Edinburgh, and Ben Shostakowski at Cornell. This is a series of papers in progress, the first of which is due to be published at FACT this summer, so you've seen it here first, folks. And we've put it up on archive, so if you want to have a look, a pre-look, that's where this is coming from, although it's not the only place that it's going. So even I, as an STS person who's skeptical of technological change in society, I have to admit that something really powerful and transformative did happen in November of 2022. And I say that as someone who's always looking away from technological determinism towards the social issues that influence technological change in society. And actually, I'm still going to say that as that person, because what changed in November 2022 with the release of OpenAI and the release of DALL-E and the GPT was not transformative because it caused or ushered in the next industrial revolution. It certainly wasn't because of the really poorly prepared chatbots that still don't seem to do the things that we want them to do, but it's because a fundamental shift happened in AI then that I think our community still has not caught up to. We're still having the kinds of conversations we were having before this moment, and I think those conversations need to change because a powerful shift has been underway that fundamentally changed what AI was all about. And I'm not just talking about the kind of hype that emerged at this period, although hype is a really important part of the story, which I'll come back to. But because the role of AI entirely changed in that moment from a question of technologies, which maybe we could improve or do things differently with, to a question of market making and economic capture and political capture, period. And that is what this work is all about, which is drawing attention to what has happened in this new era of AI, which is ironically not about AI at all. What it is about is something that we are going to refer to as the project of AI, to distinguish it from AI itself, which is slippery, again, for reasons I'll come back to. The project of AI is fundamentally a world-building endeavor to construct a network of power that is animated by a key series of brokers. Some of these are individuals, some of these are corporations, some of these are funds, some of these are countries. And the goal is to render a network of power material, infrastructural, and incontrovertible. Something that we cannot contest, that we cannot have democratic voice against, that we cannot change, and that we cannot avoid. And to do this through expansive, already existing, but expanded techniques of market making at tremendous scale. And in other work that I do with NASA, I talk about this kind of conflation of the economic and the technological as a kind of techno-socioeconomics, because it's not just that the economics are determining the kinds of technologies that are being built, but the socially embedded marketplaces, the social relations in which those market interactions are taking place, is what is part of the social shaping mechanisms of technology in this period. So when I talk about the project of AI, that's what I mean, come on over, about this shift from the technology to the market making, which is about political economic capture. I think this is really hard for us to make this shift because, I mean, not only are we get upset by certain kinds of images that hit the media, but because we're used to things being about technology. Like, and I get it, like I was building computers on my bedroom floor. I learned to program in BASIC when I was 8. I was a sysop of my bulletin board system at my high school. I'm a like consummate hacker who builds all kinds of like crazy stuff at home to be evaded from the cloud and stuff. But it's not about the technology anymore. It's not. It's not about how it's made. It's not about how to improve it. This is even hard because of the work I do with NASA, which is also among consummate engineers who must perfectly engineer a system to work exactly, materially on the first go. It's not even about that anymore. It's only about the technologies of AI insofar as it enables the extraordinary market making and infrastructural capture at scale. That conflation between the kind of scaling that's required for building sort of neural networks in approximating chat, right, in conversation with AI, with the scale of return on investment that capitalists are expecting, venture capitalists are expecting for investment. That's it. Now, the difficulty here is not just that this is taking place, but because we as a community have been locked in a particular form of technical and even socio-technical critique that I think was very powerful up until 2022 when they released these models and fired all of our friends. And what is happening now that I think we have to pay attention to is that our critique is now being enrolled in feeding the system that we're trying to critique, inadvertently, in a backhanded way. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So first, I'm going to talk about how do you see material political economy. This is big, it's huge, right? And it's stuff that we as technologists or even as social scientists of various different kinds aren't usually trained in the vocabulary for understanding this or for appreciating it or for recognizing it and for what the role it plays in the kinds of technologies we're analyzing. And then I'm going to go over 5 decoys that are used to entrain us into having conversations that we think are critical or constructive of like alternatives that actually are conscripting us, and you'll recognize my Latourian phrase here in actor network theory, conscripting us into the network of participation that builds the power of the project of AI. And this requires urgent new methods if we are still dedicated to, as I believe we are in this room, to transparency, to accountability, to fairness, because we will no longer achieve them through prior mechanisms. So first, how do you see a political economy? Because it's really big, and also how do you fit that in the room? This is a difficult question because we have to shift the scales of our thinking alongside the scales of activity that are happening at this point at not just national but global scale. So we have to move beyond the algorithm, beyond the desktop where we observe people interacting with machinery, beyond even the data centers to see processes that are being set in motion across the globe and new forms of agency that emerge when humans and machines are brought together in this way, particularly when the networks of power socially are so thickly imbricated or built upon or built into, concretize the networks of power materially. That's the key thing. is that we now see the concatenation of this political maneuvering and economic maneuvering into the infrastructures of the technologies we confront every day. So let me bring 3 literatures to bear on this to help you see this. The first comes from media sociology, from Manuel Castells, and this is his concept of the networks of power. And he developed this by studying the emergence of Rupert Murdoch's media empire in the 1990s and early 2000s. And what he was able to show is that the key thing that Murdoch was doing in assembling the network of power was, again, that play between a physical network with physical power, like actual conduits, and the immaterial social networks among powerful individuals who control the mediation of communication in society. So what he says is that you get these elite kind of brokers and switchers who elaborate the network technically and socially and can move or direct flows of power and communication as they so choose. So the point of building a network of power is to build a thing that is both material and also relational and economic at the same time, through which you direct the switches. Now this is composed of human and non-human elements. It sounds very similar to Latour, and actually at a certain point Bruno Latour and Manuel Castells had a bunch of meetings. They had they wrote some things together. But Latour is not as interested in power, and Castells is deeply interested in power. There have been many critiques in STS about the lack of power in Latour, the lack of gender, the lack of other kinds of inequalities in social relations. But certainly for Castells, he's talking about how elites hold on to power in society and instantiate that through the kinds of networks we use every day. And the key element also is that these networks then become what Latour would call an obligatory passage point. That means you have to pass through them. You cannot evade them. And in many ways, a lot of my work on evasion in the personal data economy is coming up against these points, right? In which the attempt is to capture so much of our interactions that we actually cannot evade those systems at all. You can imagine how this would be very economically profitable if you create the system that nobody can avoid using. Another set of literatures that are really important here come from economic sociology, and this is around the sociology of market making. Now, unlike economists who seem to think about some economy happening out there according to some natural laws, sociologists think about economic relations as fundamentally what we call embedded. That means they're embedded in social relations. We think about markets, even big markets, even like very faceless market transactions, as happening according to very similar kinds of rules as you would find in a classic, market in a small French town somewhere or something like that, right? Where who you know and how long you've known them also determines prices, where bartering is still very much a part of the deal, right? That those kinds of relationships still infuse the market. Now, what we know from studies of capitalism is that in moments of political and economic uncertainty, capitalists see the opportunity to make markets. That is, they create whole cloth things that weren't even necessarily there before. They do that with players who were there before and use the sort of concentration of a circuit of those players to capture already capture a created marketplace as they go along. So they do this, first of all, by manipulating our visions of the future. This is why we get hype, right? We get the hype because what's happening is market making. Now, we as technologists are like, but the technology can't do that. That's not the point. That's not the point. The point is they are making the market, and the market is them. The market is them. So the other thing that we know is that when we create markets, these elite communities that work together will exchange materials and will sort of enter into this kind of preferential agreement with each other to create what we call a circuit of capital, or an economic circuit that comprises the marketplace. And they will deeply price set within that marketplace. There's classic studies of like law firms interacting with corporations and how they adjust their prices based on the relationships they expect to have or maintain with the corporations. So you can see this, for instance, in that mind-boggling diagram that so many of us confronted that was in the Project of AI slide, where people are like, but how is this possible? They're exchanging chips that don't even exist yet, and they're exchanging futures and a thing. Yeah, because they're creating a market. They're building the market in which the key incumbents become the sole major players. The last time we saw this around the last financial crash, I love it that we have to talk about the recent financial crashes, but let's talk about the one in 2008, 2009. And what immediately came out of that was the market making around tech in Silicon Valley, specifically around the data economy, number one, and around things like Uber and the sharing economy. And there you saw these people who already had ties to the tech corporations. They were part of the PayPal mafia. They went to Stanford at the right time. They did right. They had those social ties, built the market, and became still the definition of like that data economy. Is still people like Facebook and Meta and Google. The definition of the sharing economy is still like the Uberization, right? So they define and build that market. That's the whole game. Now let's throw some STS in there and bring in the notion of material political economy, which Donald McKenzie, who's an economic sociologist / STS scholar, brings about, in which these economic jostlings, these socially embedded jostlings around economic and market control, become embedded directly into the physical material infrastructure of a technology, and in this case, of expansive technology. Now we know from Lee Starr that infrastructures are both material and relational. They are laid down along an installed base. That installed base could be the former railway lines that then became the lines for the phone services and stuff like that. But they can also be based on the installed base of like the PayPal mafia and who they knew, right? Like you can have relational substrates as well as technical. In fact, they're often the same. Now we also know from her teacher, Thomas Hughes, who did the study of Thomas Edison, that economic capture modes are built into those infrastructures as well. We like to talk about the story of Tesla versus Edison as a question like DC and AC and which kind of current was best and stuff, but actually it was all about economic capture, and it was all about the kinds of relationships that Edison made with the state, and by building a kind of incontrovertible company / technological system, like infrastructure for providing literal and metaphorical power, right? That was what won. Had nothing to do with current. I mean, only in so much as the way that current was directed enabled him to build out that kind of economic capture. We also know from work in anthropology that what makes certain people powerful in these kinds of networks of flows is that they play this kind of switching role where they can redirect the flows. So if you get too much friction in one location, you just activate another workforce in the Philippines. And if that doesn't work, you activate them in Kenya. Or if this kind of supplier falls, you move to that kind of supplier. And so a lot of the power in the network comes from, as it expands, comes from that ability to do that switch back and forth. The other interesting element here is that we're observing a kind of technopolitics. A lot of this has been described before as technopolitics. But prior work on technopolitics tends to look at things like the state. And the state is in a particular form of retreat right now, even though it's very bullish in other ways. It's in an economic regulatory retreat. These kinds of marketplaces that are all about insiderness, should be illegal in a democratic capitalist society. That's what makes it democratic capitalism, right? Because there's that kind of oversight. But within a society where the state has decided not to regulate that market, even though the state is pumping money into other things like military applications, what we're getting is the emergence of this. The market players are almost entirely dominated by these core personnel. So that's what I mean when I talk about the project of AI. And I hope they're getting to the point where maybe you can see that now. That even though most of our conversations have been about machine learning or tools or algorithms or bias, how do you talk about bias when you're talking about this? How do you talk about inequality and reducing inequality or making opportunities accessible for people when it will have nothing to do with the texture of the tech and everything to do with whether or not they can counteract something like this? That's, I think, my biggest concern. And that's also why in the paper we define 5 decoys. Yes? You want to jump in? Yes.
Perhaps, like I was thinking about the whole thing a bit more simply.
Okay.
Like, you know, AI companies are trying to scale, and then, like, it all becomes a bit of a bubble, but it all sort of happened accidentally.
No, none of this is accidental, but we can talk about that in questions.
Sure.
None of it is accidental. Okay. The key element thing that I want to pay attention to for the remainder of the talk is what we call decoys. Now, by decoys, we don't mean that they're unimportant. By decoys, we mean that they detract from the main event. And decoys are complicated here because they're often the kinds of things that we feel like we have the technical expertise to jump in and help with, or that maybe they are seeking our help. But actually, they are seeking our attention away from the project of AI. And so to that extent, maybe decoys, it's kind of like a magic trick or misdirection. Like the whole point of the magic trick is it's not that you're actually doing magic, it's that you're getting someone to pay attention over here while you do the thing. So that's what we mean by the decoys, and that's the way in which that we are becoming increasingly enrolled in the project of AI. So let me give you 5 of these, because I think they're really important. And again, these have all been critical to the conversation up to 2022. And I think they were playing an important role in the conversation up to 2022, when the gloves came off and the market making began in earnest. So the first is what we call an ontological decoy. What kind of a thing is AI? What is AI and what can it do? It can't do that. It can't do that yet, but it might be able to do that in the future. We could maybe be able to do that with AI. So you recognize this kind of conversation everywhere. Now, Lucy Suchman has written very powerfully about the incontrovertible thingness of AI and the kind of like incredulity that we could still be having these conversations about such an object of AI as if it were a singular object, as if it had these kinds of properties at all. And we also see this a lot in the kind of publications about AI that are like, yeah, this is so interesting, but that isn't at all what it does. Like, but maybe if we could correct the technical particulars of the conversation, we could correct the problem. But of course, remember, the technical particulars are no longer what the conversation is about. So the problem here is that this feeds the project of AI instead of undermining it. First of all, because it draws us into utterly unanswerable questions. What is it? Like we'll never answer that. And in fact, the more of us try to answer it, the more definitions there are, the slipperier it becomes. And the more people could say, well, yes, but people define AI in so many different ways. And now the key thing that's important is they must maintain ontological flexibility, because that's how you grow the network. The more people who are like, you know what, we were a shoe company, but maybe we're really an AI company, the more powerful you become, right? So they actually want to maintain the fluidity of the definition. They don't care what you think it can do and what it can't do. They don't care about that. They care about maintaining that openness. This also enables what in sociology, my colleague Steve Woolgar has called ontological gerrymandering, which is where you can kind of like, it's like a gerrymandering project in politics, but you're doing this with objects. You kind of move the boundary of whose problem it is to solve and what kind of a problem it is. So is AI a social problem? Is it a technical problem? Is it an economic problem? Is it an education problem? The more you move those boundaries, the more flexible and multiplicitous AI becomes. But you're doing this purposefully because the boundary will never include you as the responsible party if they're manipulating the boundary. This is that part at the end of the paper where like, this would be very important if only someone else would do this. For future work, someone should, right? So I think what's difficult here is that it stops us from being like, is this a good use of AI? Instead to be like, is this AI? So we want to get away from this kind of like, again, it's a decoy. It's not that it's not an important question. It's not that it wasn't probably a very, very important question up till 2022, November 2022. It's just that now that question has become the lure, because now we participate in the problem. The second decoy we identify is what we call the inevitability decoy. Again, these are the things that drive us nuts as technical people, because we're just like, it can't do that. Like, that's not possible. And yet, continually in the conversation, well, the genie's out of the bottle, you can't put it back in, you can't stop the future from coming. You, undergraduates, will need this for your job. Don't think again, but you can use this product instead. AGI is coming, we can't stop it. Or we have to beat China. China's going to get this before we do, or whoever it is going to. What are they saying in China about America getting this? Probably like, those guys. Okay, so look, I have already mentioned that a massive component of market making is manipulating visions of the future. This is essential to creating the market. That's how capitalists work in these moments of economic uncertainty. So it's part of market creation and capture. But it also contains a bunch of power moves. So first of all, it doesn't matter if the future comes or not, because you can, again, manipulate the temporal horizon. It's just like all those people in like the death cult that really think the world's going to end in like April 2012, and then like they wake up the next day, they're like, oh, it's May. Next month, like, no, he really is coming eventually, right? Like, whatever. Like, so, but this doesn't affect religious communities. In fact, it intensifies their fervor. We know this from the sociology of religion. The more you have this kind of like anticipatory future we're all working towards, or that we believe will come, the more you are enrolled in the project of hastening its coming, regardless of whether it comes or not. It also requires you to constantly shift temporalities, Remember when Elon was like, we're gonna be on Mars by like, I don't know, yesterday or whatever? Like, it's just, no, you don't. Because his job is to keep saying it and to keep pushing that event horizon the same way that they do with things like AGI, because it's not about the technology, it's about the project of AI. So the problem is when we engage at all with this kind of talk and try to sort of take it seriously, we are fueling a pipeline for more AI workers, right? Which includes people who just use AI, because when you just use AI, you're feeding AI. So that's right, it probably is inevitable. I'll have to teach this to you in my classes or something. It also, I love how they're like, no, this is just like the Cold War. This is just like nuclear weapons. I'm like, which part? The part where afterwards everyone was so consumed by guilt that they all became involved in like non-proliferation activities because they'd like wiped out 1 million people just by the use of this particular weapon, and like how there were massive trans-governmental regimes to constrain it, or how many like multiple like problems happened, like the Chernobyl, which was like 40 years ago, like yesterday. I mean, are those the parts you're talking about? No, we're talking about the part where we just no holds barred run towards the future, because otherwise China will get there before us. So like, if let's okay, sure, let's talk about that, but why don't we bring in what actually happened in World War II and what happened afterwards with nuclear weapons and what's happened with these major kinds of breakthroughs before. Then there's also this like, it's inevitable, so we gotta work with communities to get it right. And the problem is then you're enrolling more communities in producing that inevitable future. So you've gotten more people involved in the stakes. So again, just where we think we're doing the right thing, surely participatory design is how we'll get it right. Like, no, we're not. That's how we do what they want us to do. Okay, the third is a disruption decoy. This technology will disrupt everything. You gotta move fast with breakthroughs. Disruption is innovation. So this takes form of like, what is the future of work with AI? Will robots take our jobs? How is our work changing because AI has this disruptive power? I think it's amazing that we talk so much about how we love disruption unless you get disrupted. So like when China releases DeepSeek, they're like, no, not that kind of disruption, because it's disrupting the project of AI, right? Releasing an open source tool that uses power that efficiently at that kind of scale is disrupting the project. It has nothing to do, again, with the technology. So this feeds, again, the project of AI, because basically what's happening is the incumbents are trying to take this moment to become the Uber of AI. They want to define that market order that secures their interests. So this, on the one hand, distracts away from other things that are actually going on with the implementation of AI that is changing jobs. For instance, it distracts from the extraordinary concentration of power across sectors and industries and national boundaries, which we don't even currently have the mechanisms to track. I mean, not just because now they're compromising the National Bureau of Labor Statistics, but because those labor statistics tend to be on a national basis. So we don't see when thousands of jobs are moved from America to the Philippines and then to Nigeria. We don't see that. It's not a thing we can track purposefully, because that's how they switch the flows of the network. So these are the kinds of things we should be paying attention to, but when we talk about the future of work and we think the future of work is all happening here and it's happening through these AIs and things, and we're not paying attention to the project, we miss the point. We also continue to accrete market value for those incumbents who are now the Magnificent Seven, and now they are the market. I mean, arguably this market making has worked so effectively that they now are so too big to fail that even if the bubble pops, they feel like, what happened in the housing crisis will happen for them. They'll get bailed out. Something will happen. We also distract from this reorganization of firms through offshoring and through hoarding of capital in particular places, which actually is a huge part of the disruptive effects of the project of AI. But when we think about the disruption of AI in the workplace, we're not seeing any of that. And it actually also brackets where the labor is actually happening. Fourth is what we call the safety decoy. The safety decoy is, let's have lots of conversations about AI safety as if AI safety is a solely philosophical or technological or ethical question, as if organizational sociologists for years have not shown that issues of safety and problems with safety and hazards are actually about organizational issues in organizations, but that's fine. It's fine for people to ignore that field. But it assumes that AI could maybe be made safe, maybe alignment is the way, maybe this ethicist is the way. It's so great that some companies are really taking a stance on AI safety, because now they have like grants for AI safety. The decoy, right? Now, again, these were really important. I think these were incredibly important conversations until it became about market making and not about the technology at all, right? Here we go. So first of all, it frames safety as a thing that can be embedded in a machine and that is not part of like an entire risk apparatus of an organization, which like 40 years of studies, maybe more. It also ignores the serious harms of economic and political capture in what was formerly a democratic context. The serious harms, and here, like referring to Arvind and Suresh Kapoor's work on the sort of normalization of AI, right? Like that we're like, why don't we just talk about the actual things as opposed to like the big existential stuff? The big existential stuff is again part of the manipulation of the future and the sort of hype cycles that are necessary, even if it's about the Terminator scenario. It's part of the way to manipulate the future so that you're not paying attention to the project. But ultimately what's happening is the kinds of harms that are already occurring because of the project of AI and the kinds of harms that will ensue for democratic participation, for the existence of a commons, for the existence of people with various different, forms of identity, like those harms are going to far outweigh which way the trolley should go. And it ultimately supports this kind of TASCREAL sort of ideology of inevitability by assuming that we should be spending time improving this technical problem around safety particulars when that's actually also going to become impossible. I realize also, like, this is a very polemic talk. You may not agree, but I will also be happy to argue with you. And then the final one is the regulatory decoy. And I'm really sad about this because many of my colleagues in this room have fought with legislation for years and have really done incredible and careful work on legislating AI and regulating AI. Again, I think all of that was pretty effective up until relatively recently. So the regulatory decoy asks us to engage with these questions of how we should best regulate AI, which kind of regulatory contexts are best for AI, how we should be doing that at scale. But the problem is we are no longer doing AI, we are now doing the project of AI. And the project of AI is really about that market, cornering that market and the political economic problem. So beginning with the railway barons, leaders of companies and tech titans of the time have realized that when you get involved in regulation and when you show up and you're like, man, please regulate us, you can move regulation in your favor. It's better to be involved than just to get regulated. And Silicon Valley went through this about 10 or 15 years ago where they're like, oh, wait a minute, we should go to Washington, right? Now, in the meanwhile, it's kind of interesting because on the one hand, they can show up and be like, please regulate us. On the other hand, they're doing everything they can technically and economically and politically to build the kinds of things that are unregulable. And that also produces a sense that, man, the technology moves so fast that the law just can't keep up with it. No, they are evading you. They are working with their teams to know exactly what they should build that you cannot regulate. Trust me, I worked with artificially intelligent robots on other planets for 20 years. They were built with thick government oversight, subject to like really particular local contexts of governance. They had governance built in. We could still be making that, but they're choosing not to. Now, other places like the EU are getting a little better at holding these people to account, again, because they're not regulating the technology, they're regulating the market that's being made around the technology. And I think the Digital Markets Act is quite interesting because it is doing the thing that many of our, anti-monopolistic laws should be doing, which is taking aim at that market making and that capture. And I should mention here also that the tech barons and that the age of the railway, like Carnegie, really figured out how to corner the market through vertical integration. So he bought the steel mills that provided the rails for his railroad. And that, after a while, people were like, you can't do that anymore. We're going to regulate that away. Murdoch managed to do it by buying up lots of other companies and having so many stakes in all these different companies. What the tech titans are doing right now with this particular market, again, because regulation has caught them and been like, yeah, you're right, that was a loophole, you can't do that anymore, is now they're building these kind of lateral networks of exchange. NVIDIA bought a 4% stake in Intel, right? That was very convenient when it was dipped low for Intel, and now Intel's back up again partly because of the 4%, right? So now you've got this kind of distributed network that creates what's functionally monopolistic, but not visibly monopolistic. But again, this is evading regulation before it can catch up with you, not because that's a necessary feature of the technology itself. So when we engage with the fact that we could regulate AI, and not regulate the project of AI or come after the project of AI, we fall prey to what Dana Boyd and others have called a techno-legal solutionism, which is assuming that there might be a legal solution to this problem that's actually addressing the technology as opposed to this broader context. And it also enacts the configuration that they're precisely taking advantage of, which is that institutions and global structures are currently in disarray. Oh my God, I guess we better catch up and regulate is part of the very same problem, that gap that's allowing them to rush right in and do the market making to begin with. So, and it also enrolls us in trying to enact a future and work towards a future with them that, like, honestly, like, they're not committed to making that future come. They're going to continue to move that horizon out because that's how you do market making. So those are the 5 big decoys, and I hope I've helped you see some of what, or gives you some language for talking about the project of AI, and also for why this is creating tremendous difficulty, because the kind of work that we're doing, that we've developed incredible expertise around, we've built conferences, we've got funding around, is now not only probably not going to get funded, but if it does, it's being picked up by these companies to be part of their project of market making. And this causes tremendous challenges to precisely the things that we want to achieve, like transparency and accountability and fairness. We can't do it. We can't do it, first of all, because the technological confrontation is no longer viable. It is no longer about the AI itself. It's about the project, right? It's about getting it into as many places as possible so you can build that incontrovertible material network or infrastructure that you cannot evade. Also, the places you think you might look to for, like, you know, accountability are not where the accountability lies. Remember that ontological gerrymandering and the switches and the, right? You could talk till you're blue in the face till Sam Altman, but he's not actually in charge. Same with Elon, and I have many stories. But, like, even the CTOs aren't necessarily in charge, right? You've got this entire network arrangement of funders and of investment capital and of banks and of sometimes politicians and investment funds, right, that all of our pensions are invested in, right? That means that even if you found the one CEO, like the Anthropic guy, who's willing to be like, no, I actually want to take a stand about this, he's got to fight with his entire board, he's got to fight with this other marketplace that is busy going to, you know, edge him out. Only too happy to see him if he's not going to toe the line to get out. So the network will shape shift under you also because it's trying to evade detection. And as it does that and shape shifts, it's accreting new players to increase their power. Do we have to regulate the shoe companies now? Like, right? Or do we have to, like, mom and pop businesses or schools or universities? Like, what? Because the network has now become so extensive, again, because of incontrovertibleness. So this is my big concern, is that this kind of network capture at scale is going to effectively, if it hasn't already, preclude, if not choke off, opportunities for democracy or for equality in future because of what that market is doing. And again, market making techniques, we've witnessed this for years, we've seen this in lots of different industries and sectors. What's astonishing here, again, because of the extraordinary degrees of uncertainty politically and economically coming out of especially the COVID-19 crisis and the failure of crypto to make up for it, we are now facing a situation that we have not faced at this scale before. So the same techniques and analytics apply. So what should we do? We want to propose a couple of new pathways that actually, instead of looking at AI, take aim at the project. Take aim at the project instead, because that's where we may find pathways to accountability. I don't know, we haven't totally tried it, but I think we should. One is to look for the material sites of network assembly. Where and how is AI being done? Where is capture being done? Where is the project of AI being stitched together? The hallways at Davos, right? Basically, the backroom deals or the pitches at Y Combinator. Where are the places where those networks are getting assembled and people are getting entrained? Let's talk way more about financing as techno-political work. This idea of the sort of techno-socioeconomics is central for understanding how these technologies are evolving the way that they are. We as technologists tend to naturalize it and be like, well, that's just what AI is. No, it isn't. It's what it is if you evolve it under this. It's like having a bonsai tree, so they just kind of go off into some direction because of the way that you have shaped it. So how does the money shape the tech of the networks? How do the networks shape the money that shapes the tech? And the fact that we're still living in a world inherited by some of these people in this, like, particular moment in, like, 2001 or something is kind of amazing. 1998 maybe. We have to start looking at global flows instead of objects. So instead of looking at the AI and trying to identify what it is and pin it down, let's work with that ontological gerrymandering and with the global flows and follow it wherever it goes. So this whole thing recently where the Ray-Ban glasses, like workers in Kenya were like, oh, wait a second, I'm looking at you nude, like having sex in your bedroom. And Meta was like, cool beans, that contract is over. We don't know where it went. It's gone somewhere else, but where is it gone? They have the ability to power that network to make that flow happen. So they've cut off to Kenya and they've moved it somewhere else. We need to know where, when, and why labor is shuffled. And we need to follow that because that, like, we need to figure out what are the apparatuses we need to see, how that labor is moving across various offshore domains, because it is moving to evade regulation, capture, oversight, or even visibility. And we have to resist both technological solutionism, but also kind of social solutionism. So I kind of pose these as sort of social problems, but I think they are inherently sociotechnical. They're inherently multidisciplinary problems. I can't follow some of this stuff if I don't have my technical experts, my legal experts, my international policy experts, but like a whole long list of people. And I think accumulating that multidisciplinary crew is going to be essential. And then I did want to say one more thing, which is a plug for the kind of work that I always get really excited by. And that is, we can build alternatives into being. That I take very seriously the idea that code is law, but not because of a legal framework, but because if they're busy evading legal capture through the things that they're building, we could be busy building things that demonstrate a world done otherwise. And I look back to the work that the time I spent on these NASA teams that were about human, robot, AI relationships. They were about like solid teamwork and governance. And that was a way, is still a way we could be building these systems. So let's go back to some of these others, some of these alternatives, these paths not taken. It wasn't that they weren't taken because they were like technically a problem, it's because they weren't part of that market-making fever that took place in 2022. It could always have been otherwise, and I think it still can. So I'll conclude by saying that I think this matters now, because the existential threat coming from AI is not coming from this character over here on the left, but it's coming from this agglomeration on the right. And that, for a liberal capitalist democracy, represents the greatest existential threat I can conceive of. So, thank you. And so let's do it. Yes, in the back.
Thank you so much for
You're
your
welcome.
talk, Janet. I'm really curious, like in one of the last slides you said that technological confrontation is not going to be like possible like in this current era, the project of AI that we're in. And I think one of the reasons why this talk or these types of conversations can be so bulimic is that when you tell people who are doing more technical work, you tell them like, hey, like your work's not going to change what's happening, it can be seen as felt as like very offensive.
Yeah, sorry.
Right? So like I'm curious, like what is your advice to people who are working on like technical safety and like more on the technical side of this model development and how they can play a role in developing alternative futures?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. I don't mean to discourage people from doing the really good work. And I think also there's a kind of labor that we will have to undertake because it is the labor that is supported by this. Now they are the market. That is the market, and they are also the political and economic playing field. So especially if you come from a field whose funding has been as entirely cut as anything in the social and behavioral sciences or in the humanities, you'll know that we will have very few opportunities in future to do anything other than the kind of directives that come from these companies, even if they're oriented towards safety and so on. I think it's still okay to be working on the things that we're passionate about that we think will move the needle. That doesn't mean I don't think we should do any technical work at all. Like, clearly, if there are ways to like not build a Terminator solution, like by like actually building a thing, like please build that. That would be very important. I'm just saying, don't lose sight of this other thing at the same time. And the technical skills are, I think, just as important, as well as the soft skills of being a member of the industry. I think at this point I'm hitting the mad as hell and I just can't take it anymore part of my career where like I feel like I've been saying the same things for 25 years and I've continually been right about them, but it doesn't matter, it's not moving the needle. And many of my friends, like coming up through like HCI or whatever, a lot of us went into industry thinking we could be the change from within. And they let us do that for a long time. We really thought we were moving that needle until they fired everybody because they were going to make a market. So please do that kind of work because I think it will be important, but then think about what you do in your off hours and protect your off hours. I'm seeing this with many of my students who go off to work in tech, and they've done this because a lot of the work that they do in tech is proprietary. So they will do community-based technology projects on the side because then they can build up their GitHub repos, and then they actually have like what looks like a calling card when they go to other jobs. What if we were using that to build the future we wanted to build? What if we were using that to work not just with academics, but to work with community-based groups to build alternatives? I'm super interested right now in like on-the-box, solar-powered, community-based AIs. Like run the thing in your community, water it from your community, not from, like with care, not from like, taking all the water from a community. What would it look like to do that? I think investing in like those kinds of opportunities that subvert the possibility for the project of AI are going to be more important in future, but that's going to require the technical work and it's going to require the safety work as well. I hope that helps. Yeah. Keep it up. Yes.
I wanted to go off of that and ask you, like, DeepSeek was in some ways a social moment, but it's also like a technical moment in that it's cheaper to do big AI stuff at scale.
Yes.
And now we have maybe these swarms of agents that you can deploy locally.
Yeah.
Why doesn't something like that take this project out of existence?
It could do. I think the project is still doing a lot to maintain its handle on things. So like, we're seeing a lot of this more with the kind of agents in China, some of these new models that are like being run on their cell phones and that kind of thing. And like some of that's really exciting and interesting. There is some stuff you can only do with the power of compute that comes from really large centers.
Or is that just what they really want us to think?
That's also what they really want us to think, and it's also what they want us to buy into, right?
Yeah.
And so like a lot of our companies and a lot of our universities, especially at moments when those companies and universities have lost money following the pandemic and what's going on politically, are all too happy to then be like, yes, I'll take this grant from you. You can pay. You'll make up for the salaries we can't pay, or yes, we'll get into this arrangement where we'll pay you a small fee to have access to your compute powers. So I think they're still using it as an opportunity. But you're right, we could be deploying that for an alternative. And that's probably also where getting back into these technical questions of the technical issues of safety are going to be essential too. But we have to think about those. I always like to think about these technologies in an organizational context, because I worked with these teams that directed robots, and so the organization was everything. The robot didn't do anything unless the team decided, right? And so it was a very clear delineation kind of tasks there, but the more we can understand these kind of human contexts in which such kinds of agents might be deployed outside of what the project of AI wants us to do when we deploy AI, I think that would be great. Let's do more of it. Yes.
Thank you for the talk also. I have a question that I'm really unsure if it's a clarifying question or something that gets to the heart of the talk.
Okay, go for it.
Which is, you use kind of throughout the word they as like they don't care about this or they want this or they think this.
Right, yeah.
I guess, who is the they? Is it like the best? I think of them as market makers. That's how I think of
market
them, but
makers.
How does that relate to like intentionality, going back to Dominic's question of like, are they an abstract force? If so, where does the intentionality come in? Is it specific people? Yeah, who's the they?
It's a good question. Wow, let's talk about agency and intentionality at CITP. Yes, that's good. We won. Yay. I think okay, so there's a couple of things. There have been a lot of moves in this sector that really were quite intentional. The gauntlet being thrown down with GPT originally in November of 2022, everybody had AI that they were working on. Everyone had these projects, everyone had these ethics teams, everyone had all that. They were all like, it's not quite ready, this technology isn't good, it's not working, it's not good. And it was really the kind of gauntlet throwing in a moment of economic precarity also for that organization, that they were like, we're gonna make this market now. So in fact, there were many intentional players. Now, what we know from actor network theory, for instance, is that agency is never really held in single people. It emerges from groups of people and not people working together. And so the more you sort of scale a network like this, the greater your capacity to act, but also the greater your ability to sort of transduce or pulse agency across that network, and it makes it very hard to pin down. This is why networks like this love to have the fall man or the fall woman, right? Because then they can be like, oh, it's Sam's problem, right? And that's partly what the CEO's job is to stand up and look like they're the ones that have the power or the agency. When actually what's happening is the more of these things you conscript into the network, the more that agency becomes diffused and superpowered. So you can do more, and you can do more with intention, but that is very, very hard to pin down on single individuals. And I think that's why I've been using the pronoun they. In the paper we talk about the brokers, identify the AI brokers. Brokers is a very intentionally slippery term though also, because it refers to individuals, but also, venture groups, but also investment funds, but also corporations. Because each of these members as participants or nodes in the network is trying to influence that network in a way that works for them. So I think more generally when I'm like, that isn't what they want, I mean, that is certainly a thing that would undermine the capabilities of this network to do the kind of acting that they want to be able to do, that participants want to be able to do. So there are ways to sever these bonds. There are ways to, in actor network theory, we know that it's very unstable, that people can break away, that technologies stop working, data centers go up in flames, literally and metaphorically, and that will challenge the ability of the network to hold. But the larger the network is, the more stable it can become. And that's, I think, what they're trying to scale to so rapidly, is not just the ROI hockey stick, but that incontrovertible sunken-in infrastructure that allows them to behave as if they're not as unruly as we'd like them to be. Does that help? Yeah. I have a paper I have yet to write about actor network theory that I think will translate a lot of this, because its vocabulary I think was mistranslated into English, and if you translate it differently, it makes a lot more sense. So watch this space. Yes, here and here. Yeah.
So I want to give a more spicy question.
Do it.
Right?
Do it.
This
Spicy
talk is
time.
very controversial. I think if you were to say this to OpenAI safety team, they would strongly disagree. A lot of people
that's
on
fine.
that space.
Yeah.
So my question is what is wrong normatively about this? If you think about the way in which technologies have evolved,
Yes.
they have typically been through large corporations done this, and an opposing view to yours is that the decoys you place are actually ways of putting these things in rails, and there is these people that are going to become terribly rich from this. This is the way of the world, and this is the ways in which you kind of regulate these things, or you prevent the bigger externalities for this. The examples you've given for previous technological revolutions are arguably things that people find valuable, right? So even Uber, with that I think is perhaps the most controversial one.
Sure.
People find valuable. Social media, people find valuable. Railways have transformed the way things are.
Yeah, sure.
So my question is more so why, I'm posing it in the most adversarial way possible, but it's kind of why is that wrong? Why is it bad that these companies are doing this? Isn't it to some extent a recent example would be crypto. Crypto, I think that most of the companies related to this have lost a lot of money, even though Bitcoin is still high. But kind of this cycle around crypto has tremendously gone down because it has not kind of provided utility to people. So it's in a way, why should this matter? Can this be something that people will ultimately find useful, and then the decoys make sense because of that?
Yes and no. So I think the idea that technologies have always been developed by companies is not true, but there is a history of capitalist development of technologies, and of course capitalism has changed over time too, and technologies have developed differently in different countries that instantiate capitalism or other economic systems differently. So we see technologies emerge from a variety of different places. And I think I'd go back to some of the original social construction of technology arguments about the bicycle, for instance, right? This is a classic case that then there's all these different ideas about what the bicycle could look like, and there's all these different people who have problems they want the bicycle to solve, and it's in the company's best interest to not just solve those problems, but also define those problems and define whose problems they care about and whose they don't. For instance, they don't care about lady riders who want to ride in their dresses, but they're unable to straddle the seat, but they care about the fast riders who want to go faster, and they're going to put on inner tubes so that they can do that, and then they're going to have a whole narrative of everyone's worried about safety because the bikes are going too fast, so they're going to have a whole narrative about the safety bicycle, right? So companies have always done this kind of and Pinch and Biker talk about it as relevant social groups, who you're bringing into the fold and who you're not. So I think I don't really have a problem with that insofar as it is largely concerned technical systems that ultimately have been interesting or useful or whatever. What I think is complicated about this moment, and potentially the last time we faced this was the railway barons, whose market-making power was only disrupted by crash of 1929, by the flu epidemic, and by World War, right? World War was what was taken to rein that in. is that the threat that this is now posing to democracy is so severe that it's a moment where I'm like, okay, actually I'm gonna throw my hat in the ring and say this is a problem. If we were just building a thing that didn't undermine democratic political participation so heavily, so severely, like, and so out of balance with what we would normally expect. Even the idea, like when the personal computer came out, that was going to democratize. We had these ideas about these technologies that were supposed to democratize. Like, of course, what happened in Arab Spring, we realized actually they weren't democratizing, but we had this idea that they could democratize. The purpose of these technologies is to undemocratize. And they are taking place in a moment of democratic retreat and rolling back of democratic norms. And as someone who is fundamentally committed to democracy and thinks that that's an important thing that we should try to uphold, I can't stay silent about it. I think it's now out of family with those prior examples. And I probably would have felt this way if I were like a monk in the 16th century who really thought that the feudalist order was the most important thing and that the Pope had the word of God and was really upset when all of those revolutionaries who were like, feudalism isn't working for us anymore because a third of the population died under the Black Death, was like, hey, how about this printing press thing? We can get the word out better. I would have been upset about that too, right? But I think in this case, because what it is going to do is clamp down the propensity for populations to have voice, that's where I'm really concerned. The kind of wealth inequality it will usher in is the thing that only any political sociologist will tell you will only lead to war and bloodshed. That's why I'm worried. Yes, here and then, yes.
A couple things.
Yeah.
One is I'm just seeing AI moving so fast that I think problem's a lot bigger than you're stating it.
Yeah, it's big. Yes.
And the other is you had mentioned other features that have been imagined. I'd be interested in hearing more about that.
Sure. I mean, I think the AIs have been used in, like, artificial systems have been used in so many interesting ways in the sciences, for instance, and in engineering. They've been used in ways that, like, I mean, not just the science teams that I've studied, but also the scientists who are doing climate modeling, for instance, or who are, working in deep sea, like, man, the people using AI to decipher sperm whale song, like, my hat goes off to those people, man, because that is an amazing and fascinating challenge. Like, we could actually do, like, interspecies communication with the loudest animals on the planet who have the most, like, one of the most complex forms of communication and, like, brains that are 8 times bigger than ours and, like, the empathy centers and stuff. Like, that's really cool. I want to see that kind of AI, right? Like, so there are other things out there, and there are forms of automation that do not take away our autonomy. Like, when I worked with these teams that were sending robots to the outer solar system and stuff, the robots are doing the things that humans cannot do. I mean, Mars is actually there to kill you. We just don't know if you'll die in 3 minutes from asphyxiation or from your blood boiling or from you freezing to death. Like, it's not clear, but it was basically 3 minutes. So, like, that's why we send the robot to do the things that humans can't. And the robots have sensors that humans don't have, a sensory apparatus. Like, that's really interesting how we build these, like, co-constituted teams that then become greater than the sum of their parts. There are ways in which machine intelligences can be so valuable as any form of alternative intelligences, right? The kinds of things that I'm witnessing now are making those possibilities less and less possible. They're erasing or marginalizing those kinds of technical systems.
We're seeing a future that just in a few years is going to outstrip us, and we're going to be left behind.
Well, that sounds like the inevitability discourse. But so then let's flip that around to the kinds of agencies that we can take. These are the kinds of agencies we can take. We can build different things. We can move in and intervene in the spaces that actually hit the project. And it's not about what the technology will do, it is what the project will do. So those are the places where I think we can seek to intervene, and we still have a voice. I think the window is getting close, but we can still do it.
Let's take one last question, and then Janet, if you have some time.
Sure, happy to stay afterwards, yeah. Thank you. Last question, go for it.
Yeah, thank you for your thought-provoking talk. I wanted to push you a little bit on the alternatives and sort of this deterministic system that you are setting out. That, I know you got a little bit more open with, like, the data brokers, but when you were talking, and they felt like very conspiratorial in a way, and like sort of the system-wide thing that, like, we can't get into. And I do think I wanted to challenge you on the decoys versus alternatives, because when do they become part of the larger system, right? Because the system is designed to have sort of, I mean, you know, like Lucy, quote unquote, is sort of like, it is designed to have the opposite view and bring them in, right? We're still working all on the project of AI, and we're still putting that in the center and building that out, may it be for different ways. So you're still sort of under pushing that idea. So I wanted to challenge you on that, like what is a viable alternative? Is that really an alternative, or does it feed into the system? And what is not?
I think we have some small windows where the alternatives really do get to live as alternatives before they get subsumed into the systems. I think there's a lot of interesting things we can do with air gapping too, that like foreclose opportunities for inclusion, right? So
I don't know what air gap
like
is.
air gap, like when you create like a physical gap between the system you're running and then everything else.
Okay.
So and you can do that economically. You can do that. I mean, we see this with cities that have proposed having their own dollars. Like I used to live in Ithaca, right? And they have Ithaca dollars. It allows you to have their own economic system. Or we're seeing this with these places that are trying to produce like more barter networks. And we're also seeing this with people who like literally air gap machines. Even in corporations, there's a ton of push. My brother works in a lot of this stuff. That they want to be using these big companies' compute power, but they don't want to be giving their data to the big companies, right? So they're trying to enforce walls such that they can give the companies a little bit, but not everything. So they don't want to be training, OpenAI or Microsoft Copilot on their data. So I think there are opportunities there where we create seams. That's the thing I get really excited about, is when we can actually like pushing back against that large kind of soupness requires erecting a series of seams, and we can do that legally, we can do that economically, we can do that politically, we can do that like with political philosophy, we can do that socially, we can do that technically. I think that's really like interesting and potentially exciting. And then I'll mention my friend Stuart Geiger has this great project called Bartleby GPT, which is running on a Raspberry Pi, like in his house in San Diego, that's all solar powered, and he trained it as a chatbot on like feminist labor studies. So when you ask it to do things, it tells you very elaborately the many reasons why it's very important that it prefer not to. And it's amazing, right? And he also has this thing in it where like it tells you exactly how much solar power it's using and how much power it's using for queries and who's querying it and stuff like that. And like that's a really neat little alternative, right? Because it just takes that moment to be like, we could be doing these things. In fact, it's playful, it's ludic, but it really inspires a form of reflection. What are we using these things for? What could we be doing that's a little different? I'd be surprised if that one gets picked up by any major, subsumed in the project of AI anytime soon. But I'm seeing more and more of this in the kind of like more hobbyist, like alternatives community, and I think there may be a path there. Anyway, thanks to everyone.